Beloved child of God, have you noticed that just when you believed life was finally beginning to make sense, everything seemed to fall apart? The people you trusted suddenly became distant. Opportunities slipped through your fingers. Doors you prayed would open remained firmly shut. The weight on your heart grew heavier, and you found yourself asking the same painful question over and over again. God, what is happening to me? What if I told you that what feels like your greatest setback may actually be the strongest evidence that heaven is preparing your greatest breakthrough? Because throughout history, before God elevated anyone, He first allowed them to walk through a season that made absolutely no sense, a season filled with silence instead of answers, delays instead of progress, opposition instead of celebration. It wasn't because He had forgotten them, it was because He was preparing them. Perhaps that is exactly where you are today. Perhaps you've been misunderstood by people you never expected would turn against you. Perhaps you've been carrying burdens no one else can see. Perhaps you've watched others move ahead while you remain in the same place, wondering if your prayers are reaching heaven at all. If that is your reality, don't click away. This message isn't appearing in your life by accident. There is a reason your spirit was drawn here today. Because before God lifts a person into a greater purpose, He often allows circumstances that reveal who can truly walk with them, who must leave, and who they themselves are becoming beneath the pressure. The difficult season you're surviving may not be the evidence that you're losing. It may be the evidence that you're changing. The obstacles standing in your way may not have been sent to destroy your destiny. They may have been allowed to strengthen it. Even the toxic people who wounded your heart may have unknowingly become instruments that expose the strength, wisdom, and faith God was building inside you. Nothing has been wasted. Not the tears, not the betrayal, not the waiting, not even the moments you thought heaven had become silent. Because God never prepares greatness in comfort. He prepares it in hidden places. And today, we're going to uncover why the hardest seasons often come immediately before the greatest elevation, why the battles you've been fighting are not random, and why the very thing you've been questioning may actually be the clearest sign that your life is about to enter a completely different season. But before we can understand where God is taking you, we must first understand why He allows the valley before He reveals the mountain. In this first chapter is where you'll begin revealing the spiritual purpose behind seasons of hardship before elevation. Chapter 1, The Valley is Not Your Destination. Beloved child of God, if there is one lie that difficult seasons try to convince you of, it is this: nothing is ever going to change. The longer the struggle lasts, the more believable that lie becomes. Day after day you wake up carrying questions that seem to have no answers. You continue praying, yet heaven feels quiet. You continue believing, yet your circumstances appear unchanged. You continue hoping, yet every new disappointment whispers that perhaps you expected too much. But what if your current season is not a punishment? What if it is preparation? This is something we often forget when life becomes difficult. We naturally measure God's presence by our comfort. When everything is going well, we believe He is near. But when everything begins to unravel, we wonder if He has walked away. Yet the Bible reveals a completely different pattern. Again and again, God prepared His people in hidden places before revealing them in public places. Before there was promotion, there was preparation. Before there was influence, there was isolation. Before there was victory, there was testing. This pattern has never changed. Perhaps you have been wondering why relationships suddenly became strained, why certain people began treating you differently, why opportunities that once seemed certain suddenly disappeared. It hurts. There is no denying that. Rejection leaves scars. Betrayal creates questions. Delays test your patience in ways success never could. But sometimes the very experiences that seem to be breaking your heart are actually breaking your dependence on everything except God. Think about it. If every door had opened exactly when you wanted, would you have learned to trust God's timing? If every person had remained in your life, would you have recognized who was truly walking beside you because they loved you, and who was only there because the season was easy? If every prayer had been answered immediately, Would your faith have become deep, or would it have remained dependent upon quick results? Growth often happens in ways that are invisible. Just as a seed develops beneath the soil long before anyone sees a single green leaf, your spiritual life is growing beneath the surface. Others may look at your life and assume nothing is happening. They don't see the quiet conversations between you and God. They don't see the nights you chose faith instead of giving up. They don't see the moments you refused to let bitterness take root, even when you had every reason to become angry. They don't see how your heart has become softer, your prayers more sincere, and your dependence upon God stronger than it has ever been before. He sees it. Every tear, every silent prayer, every battle you fought without anyone knowing. Not one of those moments has escaped his attention, and perhaps that is the greatest encouragement of all. God never overlooks hidden faithfulness. The world celebrates public victories. God often celebrates private perseverance. The world notices the crown. God watches how you carry the cross. There is something profoundly transformative about remaining faithful when no one is applauding you, because in those hidden moments, your identity begins to change. You stop living for recognition. You stop chasing the approval of people. You stop measuring your worth by what you possess or how quickly life is unfolding. Instead, you begin discovering a peace that circumstances cannot manufacture and cannot take away. That is why the valley is so important. The valley strips away every false foundation until only what is genuine remains. It exposes fears you never realized were controlling you. It reveals insecurities that success had hidden. It uncovers wounds that God has been waiting to heal. The valley is not where God abandons his children. It is often where he speaks the most clearly, if we are willing to listen. So if your life feels slower than you expected, if your dreams seem farther away than ever, if you are surrounded by uncertainty while everyone else appears to be moving ahead, do not mistake delay for denial. Do not mistake pruning for abandonment. Do not mistake preparation for failure, because the same God who leads his children into valleys also leads them out again. And as painful as this season has been, it is accomplishing something that comfort never could. It is preparing your heart to carry the weight of the elevation that is coming. But preparation is rarely only about changing your circumstances. Before God transforms your situation, he transforms the people standing closest to you. And that is where many of the deepest lessons begin. Chapter 2. When God removes people before he elevates you. Beloved child of God, one of the most painful parts of any difficult season is not the obstacle itself. It is watching people change. The people who once encouraged you suddenly become silent. Those who celebrated your victories begin to question your decisions. Some drift away without explanation. Others remain close enough to wound you with their words, their actions, or even their indifference. And if you're honest, those moments hurt more than the delays themselves, because betrayal leaves a different kind of scar. It makes you question your judgment. It makes you wonder whether you were ever truly valued. It makes you ask why God would allow someone you love to become a source of pain. Yet throughout life's journey, there is a pattern that many fail to recognize. Before God entrusts someone with greater responsibility, he often reshapes their relationships. Not because every person who leaves is evil, not because every disagreement is spiritual warfare, but because every new season requires a different level of wisdom, discernment, and emotional maturity. Sometimes people leave because their assignment in your life has been completed. Sometimes they leave because your growth makes them uncomfortable. Sometimes they leave because they cannot understand where God is leading you. And sometimes God lovingly removes what your heart would never have had the strength to release on its own. That doesn't mean the separation won't hurt. It often does. In fact, some of the deepest grief comes from saying goodbye to people who are still alive, but no longer walking beside you. You remember the conversations, the laughter, the dreams you once shared. You wonder what changed. You replay moments in your mind, searching for answers that never seem to come. But not every unanswered question needs an explanation. Some chapters close because they have fulfilled their purpose. Imagine trying to climb a steep mountain while carrying a backpack filled with stones. At first, The extra weight doesn't seem overwhelming, but the higher you climb, the heavier it becomes. Eventually, what once felt manageable begins to drain your strength. The climb hasn't changed. The destination hasn't changed. The weight has. In much the same way, certain relationships, unhealthy habits, old fears, and misplaced expectations become burdens that cannot continue into the next season of your life. God sees what you cannot. He knows the weight you are carrying. And because He loves you, He sometimes allows things to fall away before they collapse on top of you later. This is one of the hardest lessons to embrace, because we naturally pray for God to add more opportunities, more blessings, more influence, more open doors. Yet before He adds, He often subtracts. He clears away distractions. He exposes unhealthy attachments. He reveals who encourages your faith and who quietly drains it. He teaches you that peace is more valuable than popularity, that purpose is more valuable than approval, that obedience is more valuable than comfort. Perhaps you have been grieving the loss of someone who no longer walks beside you. Perhaps you've blamed yourself for every broken relationship. Perhaps you've spent countless nights wondering whether you could have done something differently. While self-reflection is healthy, carrying endless guilt is not. Not every ending is your fault. Not every departure is evidence that you failed. Some separations are simply part of God's preparation. And here is something remarkable. When toxic voices become quieter, God's voice often becomes clearer. When constant distractions fade, your heart begins to notice His gentle guidance. When you stop chasing acceptance from people, you begin discovering your acceptance in God. That transformation changes everything. You become less reactive, less fearful, less desperate for validation. Instead, you become rooted, calm, steady. You begin making decisions based on conviction rather than emotion. You learn that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness says, "I have no one." Solitude whispers, "God is shaping me here." One drains your hope, the other restores your soul. This is why your current season may feel quieter than the last. The silence is not empty. It is sacred. God is creating space for something new. He is preparing your heart for relationships built on truth rather than convenience, on loyalty rather than circumstances, and on purpose rather than comfort. One day, you may look back and realize that the people you begged God to keep were the very people who would have prevented you from becoming the person He created you to be. That realization does not erase the pain, but it gives the pain purpose, because nothing surrendered into God's hands is ever wasted. Not the friendships that ended, not the betrayals that broke your heart, not the tears that fell when no one was watching. Every experience has been shaping your character, strengthening your discernment, and preparing you for what lies ahead. But relationships are only one part of God's preparation. There is another battle that takes place long before your circumstances begin to change. It is the battle within your own heart. Because before God elevates your life, He first transforms your mind. And that brings us to next chapter 3. Before God changes your life, He changes your mind. Beloved child of God, have you ever noticed that the greatest battles are not always the ones happening around you? They are the ones happening within you. Long before your circumstances begin to change, your thoughts become the battlefield. The obstacle standing in front of you may seem impossible. The difficult season may feel unending. The toxic words spoken over your life may still echo in your mind long after the people who said them have walked away. And without realizing it, you can begin fighting yesterday's battles even while God is preparing tomorrow's blessings. This is why transformation always begins on the inside. Before your hands receive something new, your heart must become ready to carry it. Imagine giving a child the keys to a powerful vehicle. The vehicle itself is not the problem. The problem is whether the child has developed the wisdom and maturity to handle it safely. In much the same way, God is not only concerned with where He is taking you, He is concerned with who you will become when you arrive. Because success without character can become destruction. Influence without humility can become pride. Blessings without wisdom can become burdens. That is why your hidden season matters so much. While you have been praying for God to change your circumstances, He has been quietly changing your perspective. Perhaps you have noticed it yourself. The things that once offended you no longer control your emotions. The opinions that once kept you awake at night no longer have the same power. You are becoming slower to react, quicker to forgive, more careful with your words, more intentional with your peace. These changes may seem small, but heaven celebrates them. Because true elevation is not measured by how high you climb. It is measured by how deeply your character has been rooted before you climb. There is a reason storms reveal the strength of a tree. On calm days, every tree looks strong. It is only when fierce winds arrive that hidden roots are tested. The same is true in your spiritual life. Anyone can remain hopeful when everything is going well. Anyone can smile when every prayer is answered immediately. But maintaining faith while nothing appears to be changing, that is where genuine spiritual strength is born. Perhaps your current season has exposed fears you didn't know were still living inside you. The fear of being rejected, the fear of failing, the fear that you are somehow falling behind everyone else. These fears are uncomfortable to face, yet exposure is often the first step toward healing. God cannot heal what we continue to hide. He lovingly brings hidden wounds into the light, not to shame us, but to restore us. Think about how many decisions fear has influenced throughout your life. Maybe fear convinced you to remain silent when you should have spoken. Maybe fear kept you attached to unhealthy relationships because you believed being mistreated was better than being alone. Maybe fear caused you to compare your journey with everyone else's until you forgot that God writes every story differently. Comparison is one of the quietest thieves of peace. It whispers that someone else's timeline should become your own. It convinces you that delayed progress is the same as failure. It blinds you to the incredible work God is accomplishing beneath the surface. But your life was never designed to be a copy of someone else's journey. Your calling is unique, your preparation is unique, your timing is unique. Some flowers bloom in early spring, others bloom in late summer. Neither is late, neither is early. Each blossoms exactly when it was created to. The same is true for you. You are not behind God's schedule. You have not missed His purpose. The delays that have frustrated you may actually be protecting you from stepping into opportunities before your heart is ready. And perhaps that is one of the greatest acts of God's love. He refuses to give you what could destroy you simply because you asked for it too soon. Instead, He patiently shapes your heart until your blessing becomes something you can steward rather than something that overwhelms you. So every challenge you've faced has been asking the same quiet question. Will you allow this season to make you bitter, or will you allow it to make you better? Every disappointment has presented the same choice. Will you surrender to fear, or will you continue walking by faith even when you cannot yet see the destination? Because faith is not pretending the struggle doesn't exist. Faith is choosing to trust God's character when His plan has not yet become visible. And that kind of trust transforms a person from the inside out, one thought at a time, one prayer at a time, one act of obedience at a time. Slowly, almost invisibly, the person who entered the valley begins to disappear. In their place stands someone stronger, wiser, more compassionate, more discerning, more dependent upon God than ever before. This inner transformation is the foundation of every lasting elevation. But once your mind begins to change, something else begins to happen. The obstacles that once appeared to block your path start revealing a purpose you could never see before. And that is where God's preparation becomes impossible to ignore. And this leads us into the next chapter, where we'll explore how every obstacle, delay, and closed door becomes part of God's preparation for your elevation rather than a barrier to it. Chapter 4. The obstacles were never meant to stop you. Beloved child of God, there is a question that often echoes through the hearts of those walking through a difficult season. If God has called me, why is everything so hard? It is a question born from exhaustion, a question whispered after another closed door, another unexpected setback, another prayer that seems to linger in silence. At first, The obstacles appear to tell one story. They seem to declare that you are going the wrong way, that perhaps you misunderstood God's direction, that maybe your dreams were simply too big. But what if the obstacles are not proof that you are outside of God's will? What if they are evidence that you are growing into it? Think about a sculptor standing before a solid block of stone. To an observer, every strike of the chisel looks destructive. Pieces fall away. Dust fills the air. The stone appears to be losing more than it is gaining. Yet the sculptor is not destroying the masterpiece, he is revealing it. In much the same way, God often uses pressure to uncover the strength he has already placed within you. The obstacle is not there to convince you to quit, it is there to reveal the courage you did not know you possessed. Consider your own journey. If life had always been easy, would you have developed the resilience you now carry? If every person had treated you with kindness, would you have learned discernment? If every opportunity had succeeded, would you have discovered the importance of patience? The answers are not always comfortable, but they are honest. Growth rarely feels pleasant while it is happening. A seed must first break open before it begins to grow. Gold must endure intense heat before its impurities rise to the surface. A diamond forms under pressure that would crush almost anything else. Nature itself reminds us that transformation often begins with what appears to be breaking. Perhaps you have mistaken your breaking for your ending. Perhaps the pressure has convinced you that you are falling apart. But what if you are actually being rebuilt? Not into the person you imagined, but into the person God always intended you to become. There is a profound difference between those two versions of yourself. The first seeks comfort. The second seeks purpose. The first depends upon favorable circumstances. The second remains steady because its hope is anchored in something greater than circumstances. This is why your difficult season has been so important. It has been teaching you to stand when everything around you feels uncertain, to remain faithful when immediate results are nowhere to be found, to choose peace instead of panic, to choose trust instead of fear. These are not small victories. They are the quiet victories that prepare you for greater responsibilities, because elevation does not remove challenges, it magnifies them. The higher you climb, the more your decisions affect others. The greater your influence, the greater your responsibility. If God did not strengthen your character now, the weight of future success could become more than your heart was prepared to carry. So every obstacle has been serving a purpose, not to block your destiny, but to build your capacity. Think back to the moments you believed you would never recover. The disappointment that stole your sleep, the rejection that shattered your confidence, the season when it seemed as though everyone else was moving forward while your own life stood still. You survived every one of those moments, not because you were strong on your own, but because God's grace quietly carried you when your own strength had reached its limit. There were days when you thought you had nothing left to give. Yet somehow, you found the strength to pray one more prayer, to take one more step, to believe for one more day. Looking back now, you may realize something remarkable. The obstacle that once terrified you no longer has the same power over your heart. Not because the obstacle changed, you changed. Your faith grew stronger than your fear. Your peace became deeper than your anxiety. Your confidence shifted from your own abilities to God's faithfulness. That is the transformation heaven has been cultivating all along. You may still be facing challenges today. Some questions may remain unanswered. Some doors may still appear closed. But never confuse a closed door with a closed future. Sometimes God closes the door that leads to temporary comfort because He is opening a path toward eternal purpose. And while you may not understand every detail today, one day you will see how every obstacle, every delay, and every disappointment became a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. Because nothing placed in God's hands is ever wasted. Not your waiting, not your failures, not your tears, not even the battles you never chose to fight. They have all been preparing you for the moment when God says, "Now you are ready." And when that moment arrives, you will understand something that only those who have endured the valley can truly appreciate. The greatest miracle was never simply that God changed your circumstances. The greatest miracle was that he changed you while you were waiting. And it is that transformed heart that carries the unmistakable signs that your season is about to change. And this brings us to the next chapter, where we'll reveal the unmistakable signs that God is preparing to elevate you and how your inner transformation points toward an approaching breakthrough. Chapter 5. The quiet signs that your season is shifting. Beloved child of God, there is a moment in every long season of waiting when something begins to change, but not in the way most people expect. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is not instantly obvious, it is quiet, almost invisible, yet deeply real. You begin to notice that the same situations that once overwhelmed you no longer carry the same weight. The same words that used to break your spirit now pass through your heart without destruction. The same storms that once made you panic now make you pause and breathe and think differently. This is not coincidence. This is transformation, and transformation is always the first language of elevation. Beloved child of God, one of the first signs your season is shifting is this. Your internal world begins to calm even when your external world has not yet changed. That is not normal by human standards, but it is spiritual preparation. Because God never begins elevation from the outside, He begins it from within. You may still be surrounded by unfinished situations, delays may still exist, questions may still remain unanswered, but something inside you is no longer reacting the same way it used to. Where you once panicked, you now pause. Where you once doubted, you now reflect. Where you once broke down immediately, you now find a strange strength rising within you that you cannot fully explain. That strength is not accidental. It is the evidence of divine alignment. Another quiet sign is this: certain doors begin to close without struggle. Not every ending feels like rejection. Some endings feel like release. You no longer have to force conversations that once drained you. You no longer have to chase people who no longer align with your growth. You no longer feel the need to convince others of your value. And although it may feel like loss at first, something deeper begins to surface underneath it all. Peace. A peace that does not depend on explanations. A peace that does not require closure. A peace that simply says, God is rearranging my life. This is how elevation often begins, not with addition, but with subtraction, not with noise, but with silence, not with expansion, but with clearing. Because before God builds something new in your life, He must first create space for it to stand. Beloved child of God, another sign is that your prayers begin to change. You stop praying only for rescue and begin praying for strength. You stop asking only for removal of problems and begin asking for wisdom in the middle of them. You stop demanding instant answers and begin seeking deeper understanding. This shift is powerful because it reveals maturity, and maturity is one of the clearest indicators that elevation is near. God does not only prepare blessings for you, He prepares you for blessings. And sometimes the greatest preparation is not changing your situation immediately, but changing the way you relate to it. There is also something else that begins to happen. Your discernment sharpens. You begin to see people more clearly, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. You recognize patterns you once ignored. You sense when something is not aligned long before it fully unfolds. You stop confusing familiarity with purpose. You stop confusing attention with love. You stop confusing access with assignment. This clarity is not paranoia. It is growth. It is spiritual awareness developing inside you. And it is one of the quiet ways God protects those He is preparing to elevate. Because elevation without discernment leads to destruction. So He teaches you to see differently before He allows you to go higher. Beloved child of God, perhaps one of the most powerful signs of all is this. You begin to outgrow what once held you. Places you once found comfort in no longer satisfy you the same way. Conversations you once enjoyed begin to feel shallow. Old mindsets that once defined you begin to feel too small for who you are becoming. And even though you may not fully understand it yet, something inside you begins to stretch. This stretching is not discomfort for punishment. It is preparation for expansion. because you cannot step into a larger future while still fitting into a smaller mindset. And so God gently begins to expand your capacity, your patience, your emotional strength, your spiritual awareness, your identity. All of it begins to stretch in ways that sometimes feel uncomfortable, but are absolutely necessary. And here is something you must understand deeply. When your internal world begins to shift, your external world cannot remain the same for long. Eventually, what God is doing within you will begin to show around you. Doors will align, connections will shift, opportunities will emerge, but they will only make sense because of what was first built inside you. So if you are sensing change, even if you cannot fully explain it, if you are feeling a quiet release from things that once had strong emotional control over you, if you are noticing a new level of strength forming in your spirit, do not dismiss it. Do not ignore it. Do not rush it. Because these are not random feelings, they are spiritual indicators, whispers of a coming shift. And what is coming next is not just change in feeling, it is change in direction. But before elevation becomes visible, there is always one final stage of preparation. A stage where everything you have learned is tested, not in theory, but in real life. And that is where God begins to solidify what He has been building inside you. This brings us to the next chapter, where we will explore the final testing phase before breakthrough and how endurance in this stage signals that elevation is no longer distant. It is imminent. Chapter 6. The Final Test. Before the sharing. Beloved child of God, there is a moment in every divine process where everything feels like it is repeating itself. The same challenges, the same silence, the same questions that seem to have no answers. At this stage, many people begin to believe that nothing is changing at all. But spiritually, this is often the most critical point in the entire journey, because this is where God is no longer simply shaping you, He is stabilizing you. There is a difference between being shaped and being stabilized. Shaping is what happens when God is forming your character. Stabilizing is what happens when God is making sure that what He formed cannot easily be shaken. And beloved child of God, this is where many breakthroughs are either delayed or unlocked. Because right before elevation, life often feels like it is pressing you from every direction at once. Old pressures return, new uncertainties appear, emotional fatigue increases, and the temptation to give up becomes stronger than before, not because you are weaker, but because you are closer than ever. The final test before elevation is rarely about new struggles. It is about whether you will remain faithful in familiar ones. Will you still trust God when nothing around you has changed? Will you still pray when answers feel delayed? Will you still obey when obedience is inconvenient? Will you still believe when everything visible suggests otherwise? This is the refining moment, and it is not designed to destroy you. It is designed to confirm you, because elevation is not only about desire, it is about readiness. God does not elevate potential alone. He elevates proven endurance. Beloved child of God, in this final stage, one of the most important things you will notice is this: your emotions are no longer your strongest guide. What once controlled your reactions begins to lose its authority over you. You start to respond differently. Not perfectly, but differently. You begin to notice a gap forming between what happens to you and how you respond to it. That gap is growth. That gap is maturity. That gap is where wisdom begins to take root. And it is one of the clearest signs that God is preparing you for something greater. Another sign of this final testing phase is this: distractions become louder right before direction becomes clearer. Things that used to be quiet suddenly become chaotic. People that were distant suddenly reappear. Old thoughts you thought you had overcome begin to resurface, and you may wonder, why is everything intensifying now? But sometimes intensity is not a sign of confusion, it is a sign of transition. Because anything about to be moved often experiences resistance before release. Think of a door that has not been opened in a long time. At first, it feels stuck. You push harder, you apply more pressure, then suddenly it gives way. The resistance was never permanent. It was just the final friction before movement. In the same way, this season of pressure is not your final condition. It is your final resistance. And what is on the other side is movement. Beloved child of God, one of the deepest lessons in this stage is learning to trust God without visible confirmation. Not because you feel strong, not because everything makes sense, but because you have learned, through every previous chapter of your life, that God has never failed you in the end, even when He was silent in the middle. This kind of trust is not emotional. It is spiritual maturity. It is the kind of faith that says, even if I do not see it yet, I will not let go. And that is exactly the kind of faith that precedes elevation. Because God is not just preparing a blessing for you. He is preparing a version of you that can carry it without collapsing under it. So this final test is not about proving perfection. It is about proving perseverance. It is about standing in the same belief that carried you through the valley, even when the valley feels like it has no end. And here is what you must understand deeply. The enemy of your purpose does not fear your desire. He fears your endurance, because desire can fade, but endurance survives pressure. Desire can fluctuate, but endurance remains when everything else leaves, and it is endurance that signals to heaven, this one is ready. So if you find yourself in a season where everything feels like it is being tested again, do not assume you are starting over. You are not. You are being confirmed, and confirmation is often the final step before elevation becomes visible. But once you pass through this stage, something shifts, not just around you, but above you. And what God has been preparing in silence finally begins to manifest in reality. Your elevation has already begun. Beloved child of God, if you have stayed with this message until this very moment, I do not believe it is by accident. Perhaps you began watching because you were searching for answers. Perhaps you were simply looking for encouragement after another difficult day. Or perhaps there was something deep within your spirit that whispered, don't scroll past this, you need to hear it. Whatever brought you here, remember this truth. God wastes nothing. Not a single tear you cried in secret. Not a single prayer you whispered when your heart was too heavy to find the right words. Not a single disappointment that left you questioning your future. Not a single betrayal that made you wonder if you could ever trust again. Not a single delay that caused you to think heaven had forgotten your name. Every moment has become part of a greater story. A story that God has been writing long before you understood what He was doing. When you look back one day, you may discover that the season you once begged God to remove became the very season that transformed your life. Because the valley did something that the mountaintop never could. It taught you perseverance. It taught you humility. It taught you compassion for people carrying burdens that no one else can see. It taught you that your strength has never depended on your own ability, but on the quiet faithfulness of God walking beside you every single day. Beloved child of God, perhaps the greatest miracle is not that your circumstances are about to change. The greatest miracle is that you have changed. You are no longer the same person who entered this difficult season. You have learned to wait without losing hope, to forgive without receiving an apology, to trust without having every answer, to keep moving forward even when the path ahead remained hidden. That is not weakness. That is spiritual maturity. That is the quiet evidence that God has been preparing you for more than you can currently imagine. Do not underestimate the person you are becoming. The world often celebrates visible success, but heaven celebrates invisible transformation. Long before anyone notices what God is doing through you, He delights in what He has already done within you. So when your opportunities begin to appear, walk through them with humility. When new relationships enter your life, receive them with wisdom. When doors begin opening that once seemed permanently closed, walk through them with gratitude instead of pride. Never forget the valley that taught you to depend upon God. Never forget the silent nights that strengthened your faith. Never forget the moments when all you had was one more prayer and one more step to take. Those moments became the foundation beneath every blessing that follows. and if you are still in the middle of the struggle, if your answers have not yet arrived, if your breakthrough still feels just beyond reach, do not lose heart. A seed buried beneath the soil does not question whether spring is coming. It simply continues growing where no one can see. Your life may feel hidden today, but hidden does not mean forgotten. Hidden often means protected. Protected until the right season. Protected until your roots are deep enough to support the harvest God intends to bring. Remember this: your delay is not proof of God's absence. Your obstacles are not proof of His rejection. Your difficult season is not proof that your purpose has disappeared. The same God who has carried you this far is faithful to complete what He has begun. His timing has never been hurried. His plans have never been interrupted. His promises have never expired. Even when your eyes cannot yet see the path ahead, His hand is already guiding every step. So lift your head, not because every problem has disappeared, but because your hope has a stronger foundation than your problems. Walk forward with confidence, not because you know everything about tomorrow, but because you know the one who already stands in tomorrow waiting for you. Refuse to let bitterness steal your joy. Refuse to let fear silence your faith. Refuse to let disappointment define your identity. You are not your failures. You are not your delays. You are not the opinions spoken over your life. You are a person being shaped by God, strengthened through adversity, and prepared for a purpose that reaches far beyond this present season. One day, the people who only saw your struggle will witness your growth. The doors that remained closed will open at exactly the right time. The prayers that seemed unanswered will reveal themselves as perfectly timed. And the season that nearly convinced you to quit will become the testimony that inspires someone else to keep believing. So before this message comes to an end, I want to leave you with one final reminder. When you wake up tomorrow morning, do not wake up carrying the weight of defeat. Wake up carrying expectation. Expect God to strengthen you. Expect Him to give you wisdom for every decision. Expect Him to bring peace into your heart even before He changes your circumstances. Expect Him to prepare divine opportunities in ways you cannot yet imagine. Most of all, expect Him to finish what He has started in your life, because the God who brought you into this season is the same God who will faithfully lead you out of it. Your valley is not your permanent home. Your delay is not your final chapter. Your tears are not your lifelong story. Your elevation is not a distant dream. It is already unfolding, one lesson, one prayer, one act of faith, and one step of obedience at a time. If this message spoke to your heart, take a moment to let it settle within you. Return to these truths whenever the journey feels heavy, and remember that growth often happens long before it becomes visible. Until next time, beloved child of God, continue walking by faith, continue trusting God's perfect timing, and continue believing that the one who has been preparing you in secret will, in His perfect season, reveal all that He has been accomplishing in your life. May your heart remain steadfast, your faith remain unshaken, and your hope remain anchored in the unfailing goodness of God. Because your story is not ending here. In many ways, it is only just beginning.